Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and listen, Janet Yellen is a smart cookie, but John Kennedy is even smarter. He outfoxes her in front of Congress and exposes the fact that she really doesn't know as much as she thinks she does. This is a wonderful moment and a sad moment.
The only reason I can figure that y'all are doing that is to try to give the economy a sugar high 5 months before an election. Why else would anybody want to borrow at 5% when you can borrow at 4%?
Well, there is a good reason that investors are willing to accept just over 4% on a 10-year Treasury bond when they can earn 5.4% on a one-year Treasury bill.
I'm not worried about the investor.
Well,
I'm not worried about the investor. I'm worried about the taxpayer.
It's the same logic.
And let me ask you again, because I'm going to run out of time. And look, you're smarter than me. I know that. But I can grasp this concept. You're borrowing at 5% when you could borrow at 4% to deficit spend.
If I borrow it,
makes absolutely no sense to me why you do that.
If I borrow,
other than
the reason
to try to artificially stimulate the economy and help Joe Biden get reelected.
If I borrow at 4.5%, I'm locking in that cost over 10 years.
Yeah, but you just said you weren't trying to time the market.
Well,
you are trying to time the market.
It isn't trying to time the market because this is something that is a regular part of our policy. When short-term rates are high, and long-term rates are lower, the reason for that is that market participants expect short rates to go down, and they expect them to decline over 10 years to substantially under 4.5%. So even if we pay more this year than it would cost to borrow at a 10-year rate of 4.5%, the expected cost over the 10-year life of that borrowing can be the same or less than it would be if we issued a 10-year note. Now, we're not trying to time the market. We have a policy that we want to hold the issuance of short-term bills in line with recommendations of the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee.
Can I say something now? Madam Secretary, I'm going to say it again, you're a lot smarter than me. But my mama didn't raise a fool, and if she did, it was one of my brothers. And what you're doing, you know it and I know it, and all those people sitting behind you know it. You're paying 5% to borrow money when you could pay 4% to borrow money. You announced you were going to do that back in November 2023. You're working cross purposes with Jay Powell.
We're not working.
And the reason you're doing this is try to give the economy a sugar high 5 months before an election. Now, you know that, and I know that.
There's nothing about issuing short-term debt that creates a sugar high for the economy.
My chairman says I'm out of time. It's good to see you.
At first, this seems really funny. Senator Kennedy always delivers some punny line somewhere, but deep down, this is a much, much darker problem. Janet Yellen is explaining something in a way that is ultimately insane. And that's why we have Paul Stone, of the CEO of Colonial Metals Group, here with us today to hopefully explain what is she talking about. And not only what is she talking about, why is she choosing a higher interest rate? And can you actually explain it for people like me who know pretty much nothing about finance?
You know, when I watch folks in this venue of Capitol Hill, there's a sales, contest that's going on. Someone's trying to sell someone something. And Janet Yellen is trying to sell us that it's due to extremely complicated financial gymnastics that the government needs to be borrowing money at 5% when they could be borrowing money at 4%. So if they're overpaying for the borrowing of money, where does that extra 1% slide off to? To me, it's another version of stimulus. The reason this country needs stimulus, folks, and if you start looking at the $34 trillion in debt, stop calling it debt. No one's ever paying that back. You understand, 1 million seconds, like A billion seconds is 31 years. A trillion seconds is 31,000 years. So in human terms, one way to look at it, that's over 1 million years of money that the Fed has created in just like mostly the last 24 years. No one's ever paying that back. So what is it really? It's $34 trillion in bills that our economy, mismanaged by the government, perhaps heavy-handed influence, not so positive for the folks here watching and listening and live in the real world here in this country by Wall Street, $34 trillion in bills that this country doesn't create enough revenue to pay. That's what that number really represents. So right before an election, we're going to kind of gush a little extra money into the system and fluff the numbers a little. So politically, from a podium, the stupid party that's currently in power gets to justify you voting for them to keep them in power for another 4 years.
So in other words, it's a bribe that costs us money.
Yeah, it costs us. We're the ones that get gutted by every stupid decision the government makes. And I'd like to see a top 10 of the great decisions that they've made. I'd give you 10 years to find them. And I mean, they really have to pass the American people's snuff test. Just give me a top 10. There isn't one.
Well, I'm not that much of a historian. I did minor in it in college, but I don't think I could help you out there, even if you did give me 10 years. So Yellen is ultimately just this creature of the swamp, and she has been inside the government for what seems to be an eternity. She probably could tell you when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, because she was probably there. But ultimately, she knows that she's supposed to be working for the people, not just constituents, because I don't think she's ever been elected. Someone in the comments correct me if I'm wrong. But she has been inside the government so long, and she understands how it's supposed to work. Why does she keep on making this decision? Why does it seem like nearly every single time people in government have an opportunity to make the right decision that will benefit the American people, they seem like they run the opposite direction? Why do they keep doing this?
I would say that, there's a game of chicken, and corporate interests are opposed to our interests. Right? So when we say, well, we'd like to pay the least for a product, the corporate world says, well, let's have stuff made in China. But then they kill the jobs of stuff being made here in America. So now it's made in India and Mexico. And then they go, oh, well, we need to trick the people. So we'll say made in the USA, but all of the parts are made elsewhere. Like, the batteries for your Tesla were made in China. Okay. So when you start looking around at who is the master of Janet Yellen, it isn't 350 million people living here in America. It's something much more powerful to her than that. And to me, that's the corporate world. And the corporations buy a living thing, right, is supposed to make as much money as it can. It's supposed to do that. But when the government sells out the principles of the people so that they can make more than they should, by canceling out the principles that we wish they would respect and honor, then we have a government that's opposed to its own people. And that's what I see today.
The biggest irony I see of this whole thing ultimately comes down to this. The party that's screaming about, we must save our democracy, is constantly undermining it. And it's just an incredibly sad thing to think about. But there is always hope. There's always hope that we can get better politicians in there. There's always hope for a better regime change. I do believe it is possible to dig us out of this debt. Mr. Stone, do you agree with me on this?
I think you have to preserve what you've got and wait for an implosion to happen around you. I had a very mean mother-in-law at one point, and she used to say to me all the time, well, Paul, you can crap in one hand and hope in the other and smash that together, and what have you got? So I don't know that hope has much power here if it's focused on the wrong thing. I do believe you have every reason to hope that America remains America forever, even though right now it doesn't feel like the country you grew up in. But when this bankruptcy, this math problem eventually gets to the end of its run, of this run, and the government is completely out of ideas and there's no more money that can be printed, I think, mathematically speaking, in the countries that fell before us, the reserve currency countries that shrank back to a realistic size that happened before us, cause you to get your country back. you're just going to have to survive one extremely painful set of circumstances for a while. And I believe from just the mathematical indications, simple ones that we could look at, not these stupid, complicated things that Yellen's trying to explain on that video, that the time for the beginning of that ugly period is around the corner.
Well, I certainly hope it gets here soon so we can start rebuilding. Mr. Stone, thank you for joining us here today and explaining this incredibly intricate problem. Y'all, catch you on the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until then, from here on Politbro, y'all have a good one.